Hi guys, it's been a while since my last YouTube video. Thank you for being here and let's get straight into this project. The first step that I usually take is to sketch the character, even just roughly, to figure out their characteristics. In this case, since this is a well-known Studio Ghibli character, I mostly decided to look through references, which included both the movie and the manga. I have yet to finish reading the manga, but I have watched the movie multiple times to prepare for this project. This doll in general was created for an exhibition. The theme was Studio Ghibli and I picked Nausicaa as the subject. I didn't watch the film until years after getting more passionate about Studio Ghibli and their projects. It actually took me a while to give it a chance because from the trailer I didn't really feel particularly interested, but I was super wrong. After watching it, I really fell in love with so many points that this movie brings up. The idea, especially of humanity kind of eating itself alive while also damaging the earth in the process. Of course, it's unfortunately not unrealistic take, but the concept of the earth and its creatures and environments transforming anyway and living even if they have to morph to survive, it's just a truly fascinating concept. About this project in general, I always start by sculpting the head and I work in layers, which means that I make the general shape of the head first without any of the features, and I then add the nose, the mouth, and the eyes later on. In this case, but it's very typical for my projects, I sculpted part of the hair. I tend to do that a lot because I really like how it looks like. I feel like sometimes with softer materials like yarn, it's tricky and it gets a little difficult to get the hair to do what you want and to get it to look very anime-like. But by sculpting it, I feel like I have a certain level of control over how it looks. I had to figure out how to create different types of mushrooms. Working with the hot glue meant obviously burning my fingers quite a bit. I tried to dip my fingers in water each time that I was touching the silicone, but I still ended up somewhat burning myself. I looked at the manga especially to get an idea of how the toxic jungle looked more up close. There were a lot of different sizes of mushrooms. The ground seemed more porous, I think that's a word, and the color that were chosen for the forest seemed on the colder side. A lot of greens, blues, and purples. Of course, since the space that I had on the base was very limited, I couldn't make gigantic mushrooms, so I had to keep a certain size, but I can do different types. For the mask, I decided to make it with epoxy clay. I sculpted directly on the face of the character. The only thing that I had to do to prepare was to cover her face with a plastic sheet just to make sure that the mask wasn't going to stick to her face. To make my life easier, while I'm painting the mask, I simply glued a wooden stick to the back of the mask. These fluffy white mushrooms that I think are also other colors, but I ended up making them mostly white, I made using cotton and wire. I was worried that being that the wire was smooth, the cotton wouldn't stick to it properly. So I decided to wrap some thinner wire around it to create more grip for the cotton. After applying the first layer of cotton, I also decided to use some sewing thread to really tie it all up so that I had a more sturdy base to work on. I made a mixture of water, white glue, and Mod Podge that I used to brush directly to the cotton to glue everything in place. I left these mushrooms to dry for at least 2 days. It took a while for them to dry. I'm not sure why, but I think maybe the mixture was a little bit too watery. But once they were dried, they were also still malleable and they could be posed, which I think worked really well. I also ended up making smaller ones, and I actually used mostly just these smaller ones. Making the homes was a pretty fun part of this project. Specifically making the texture of the shells. I used a lot of different tools and even materials like some aluminum foil and other rough surfaces that I pressed on the clay to create this bumpy texture. One thing that I had to do first and foremost with these pieces was to cover the eyes. I chose to just cover them by using some hot glue, but I'm sure that there's other ways to prevent the paint from going on the glass. Beads that I use for the eyes. As always, when I'm trying to enhance any kind of texture that I created while sculpting, the first thing that I do is to completely paint the piece with a darker color. In this case, I chose a darker purple because I thought that it just went well with the green that I was going to add on top. I had to dry brush the whole surface, which meant that I had to go very slowly and try my best not to use too much paint. I started by using a darker green. You might not see that it's dark, maybe because of the lighting in this video. And I then started to add more and more white and light blue to the color to make it a little bit lighter. The last color that I chose to use was kind of like a alien-y green for the main highlights. What I think it's always something necessary, especially when maybe you create your own shades of colors, is to always keep a little bit of that paint. There's always going to be a need if you're not really done with your project for that exact shape when you need to do touch-ups, and I think this is the case. So I think that keeping some on the side, it's important so that you can match all the colors perfectly. I painted the legs and the belly of the arms a different color. I was also going to cover the bottom half of the body in resin, mostly to protect what I consider to be the weaker parts of the sculpted pieces. The legs especially were quite thin, and even if I did make sure to use wire inside of them while sculpting to reinforce them, I was still scared that they could break. So covering them with resin seemed like a good idea just to give them that extra protection. Here is how the home looked like after I spray painted it with some varnish. And of course I had again to cover the eyes, especially because my sealer was a matte sealer, so it was going to ruin the shininess of the glassy eyes. I ended up using white glue this time around instead of hot glue, just to be more precise. The last thing that I used before I started working on preparing for the resin was this brown wash all over the bottom part of the body and the legs. Since I will be covering just the lower part of the body with resin, I had to place them upside down. I also coated Nausicaa's eyes with resin to prepare all the surfaces that I intended to cover with resin. I also made sure to brush on some sealer. I used some Mod Podge, but you can really use any sealer. To make the body, I used a wire structure wrapped in wool yarn, and I needle felted some of the body parts like the shoulders later on. For the shoes, I already had this mold that I made from the rain boots that I made for Coraline, so I decided to reuse it. I was just going to use the bottom half of the mold, fill it with epoxy clay, and then cover the piece with some brown fabric. For the jacket, I looked at some of the references from an exhibition where they created a realistic version of her outfit. It's clear that since she's also living in the Valley of the Wind, their wardrobe needs to be suited to this type of weather. The jacket seemed to be quite thick, possibly made out of wool, so I decided to not just use one layer of fabric and instead to double it to make it look a little bit more thick and winter-like. Using 2 layers of fabric also means that each piece of the pattern was turned inside out, which left me with precise edges for all the pieces for the jacket, and it made my life a lot easier when sewing them together. One tool that I really loved to use, at the moment I don't have it because it broke, but it's very useful to have around, is this little iron. It's just pretty useful to have it close while sewing the edges to flat them out. I sewed the right front piece of the jacket to the sleeve and then the right back piece of the jacket as well. After sewing all of them together, I was left with half of the jacket already done. I just decided to just check again if everything fitted, if maybe the pattern wasn't working as well as I thought, but everything looked fine. To make the skirt, I kinda kept in mind that it looked quite puffy from the illustrations, and Also considering that the wind is always moving her clothes in some kind of way, I also wanted to avoid keeping it looking flat. So I settled on making it posable by adding some wire to the inside in between the two layers, following the seams. I didn't want the wire to feel bare, so I covered it with some wool. I needed a piping where to pass the wire through so that it wouldn't move around in the skirt. For the lens, my first try didn't work. I tried to make a mold out of hot glue. What I did end up doing instead was to use some of the excess of resin that I had in one of the cups that I used to mix resin in, and I just cut the two lenses out of the piece. I tried to also refine the edge of the hole for the lenses on the head by embroidering it. I think it just looks a little bit more detailed. To attach them, I used E6000 jewelry and beads glue. This type of glue works best with any acrylic, plastic surface, or even metals. One thing that at this point, by just looking at the hat, I didn't like was how clean it looked, especially the lenses, but overall the whole hat. So I decided to test using one of the pieces that I still had of resin and with a sponge applying some of the brown wash to age it, and it looked pretty nice, so I decided to add it to the lens as well. All the clothing items, right after sewing them, tend to look too clean and neat. I think to really bring every element to life, including the clothes, it's better to rough them up a bit and try to make them look used. This way you are bringing the character to life and actually giving them some realism, and I think that that's necessary. I noticed that the ear pieces of the hat had two marks that I decided to embroider. But to make them look a little bit more three-dimensional, I ended up using two pieces of cords as a base so that I could, again, take in a more three-dimensional look. To close the hat, I made a little hook with a little piece to pass it through. It was pretty easy. I just grabbed a wooden stick and some cords and just sewed them to the edges of the hat. Something that I tend to do a lot, especially when I hand sew pieces together, is to apply a little bit of glue to the edges. Once the glue dries, you're not gonna see it. It's going to be transparent. To me, it just helps me feel like the piece is a little bit more secured and it's not going to fall apart. I also wanted to make sure that the head was not too hard to close and open once you were to put it on the doll. So I did some testing. It was pretty okay. You could still see that it was pretty baggy at this point. But I figured that since I was going to add the hair of the doll still, that would probably fill up the space. The skirt, I think I was really happy with the result. I like that it could even stand on its own on the table. I put together the two jacket pieces on the front and left them open on the back. To close it up, I used a leather stitch. I think it's also called invisible stitch. But instead of doing it on the outer layer of fabric that I have for this jacket, I did it against the inner layer, which was a little bit darker. It was a darker blue. So you could still see an opening. You can see it on the front as well. And I really like it. I really like that you could see like a small opening, and it kind of looks like there's another jacket underneath. Most of the references that I found made it seem like the knee part of these leg pieces was pretty stiff. So it needed some structure, which is why I added the felt that I put inside as a padding. The top of the felt was a little bit harder because I dipped it into water and glue. After I closed them up, I had to fake that they had laces, so I just sewed some of the cord on the edges to make it look like they were closed like that. For the hair, I just used the wool practically as it was. Normally, especially for the hair, I tend to iron it, making it look a little bit smoother. But truly, I just felt like with her specifically, it just worked to have the hair have some kind of structure and feel a little bit stiffer. The gloves were fully sculpted and painted. The only thing that I knew I was going to add later on was the cord. I also bought this little glass jar where I put a lot of cotton pieces as if she was collecting samples. And I just glue it to her hand as if she was holding it. For the edges of the gloves, I ended up making them the same way as the mushrooms. And I don't know what happened with the footage here, but it's in slow motion, so it's a bit epic, so I left it like this. Again, searching for references, looking at the illustrations, some of the works that Miyazaki illustrated for the environment and the natural elements. I really just try my best to get a similar vibe by using different materials, and especially the cork. I just felt like cork sheets, which is what I used for these blue shapes, was just a good material overall to get the same otherworldly design. all the green part that you can see is made out of resin that I just poured on the base. It's not just resin, it was a mix of resin and sand, which is why it kind of looks textury and it's not so smooth. One of the most maybe boring parts of this project was the composition for the mushrooms on the base, but I had just to figure out how to put them in a way that was harmonious, but also without covering the three characters that I was going to put on the base, which were Nausicaa and the two Ohms. I made a lot of mushrooms at the beginning to prepare for the base, which I think was a bit unnecessary. I really didn't need that many. But I was pretty happy that I had at least a good amount to choose from once I had to apply them to the base. Something that I didn't consider at the beginning, but that I ended up appreciating later on, is that the base was mostly covered in cork, which is a pretty soft material and cushy, which to me was just alleviating some of the stress that I always had with all my pieces, which is trying my best not to maybe scratch them or chip them. And I just felt like they were in a safe spot on top of the cork. The last thing that I added was all the little spores. And this is how Nausicaa turned out. I really enjoy making it. I hope you like watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye bye.